Hello, everyone.
It's like you're blinded.
Hello.
I know, that's right.
I know.
Okay. If you can hear me, clap one time. Thank you. I just want to give you some few housekeeping items. Please be sure to complete your overall evaluation. It's in your folder. Again, we use that information to help plan our programming for the next conference, but also intervening TA events and initiatives that come. And otherwise, you'll repeat the same thing. It'll be like Groundhog Day. So please complete your evaluation. For sponsored participants, your expense reimbursement forms will be emailed to you on Monday. Once you send back a completed form, BLH has promised me that they will send you your reimbursement within 30 days. So you'll get the email on Monday. Please send it back as soon as possible, and then it will take 30 days to get your reimbursement. If you don't get your reimbursement, feel free to contact me, lwashington-thomas@acf.hhs.gov, and we will help facilitate that. We would like to encourage you for those states who have tribal TANF participants to remain after lunch for the joint session. And I won't be able to see you anymore collectively, so I just want to thank you so much for your participation, for your continued attendance, and I just wish all of you traveling mercies as you go home, and I hope that your home is better than when you left it. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 years. I'll now turn this over to Susan Golonka for our closing plenary regarding TANF and WIOA. Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and I'm happy to get to lead this conversation of this closing plenary today. We're going to discuss WIOA and TANF integration and some of the innovations that have resulted from this new partnership, as well as some of the challenges. You know, it struck me yesterday when Susan Dreyfus talked about generative partnerships, and I had to go back and sort of really look it up and really, what is that all about? But it's really about, you know, going beyond just implementing the letter of the law and the regulations and the whole compliance aspect, but really trying to generate new opportunity, new ideas to create sort of the environment where new things can be tried and explored, and understanding the connections between our various systems. And, you know, she in particular had talked about, you know, the determinants of health. But clearly we know that we need a strong workforce. TANF has workers, potential workers, and sort of starting to make some of those connections. So, and it's hard because certainly with WIOA, and I think that it's now been 3 years, when you've got so many different programs coming together in a plan at a one-stop, each with their unique rules and monitoring requirements and all of that, and TANF is in fact the most flexible in this regard. But it's sort of how do you raise beyond that day-to-day work and really create a vision and move toward it. So we're going to have some of this discussion today in terms of how far we've gotten in the states represented here and where they think they would need to go. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. First to my far right is Flagg, who is with the Department of Human Resources in Maryland, where she's the Principal for Workforce Development and Innovation. In this role, she provides leadership for Maryland's primary human services programs, including economic assistance benefits, child welfare and family preservation services, and child support administration. Anne has more than 15 years of experience in program design, evaluation, and management and organizational development in both international development and domestic human services sectors. Then immediately to my right is Brandon Butler, and he is our only official labor and workforce representative here, and I said we'll try not to be too hard on him.
You're not going to beat me up in the parking lot or anything.
Well, I can't promise that.
Okay.
Brandon Butler is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation in the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning. The division oversees workforce development and adult education initiatives throughout the state. And Brandon has recently led efforts to craft Maryland's state workforce plan, which combined the workforce programs from 3 separate state agencies into one strategic plan for the first time in the state's history. In his current role, he focuses on implementation of WIOA, and also was named as a co-chair of a national policy committee convened by the Aspen Institute for Two-Generation Service Delivery. So that'll be another interesting conversation, how 2Gen comes into the WIOA implementation. And then to my left is Amy Kershaw, who is the Associate Commissioner for Programs at the Massachusetts Department of Transitional Assistance, or DTA. In this role, she is responsible for oversight of the state's TANF and SNAP programs, as well as their related employment programs. She is coordinating the department's efforts to support implementation of in Massachusetts of WIOA in the combined plan. And then last but not least, to my far left is Jeriane Jaegers-Brenneke, who has been employed with the state of Missouri for nearly 20 years. She started in high school, I guess. She oversees TANF.
Eighth grade.
Eighth grade. There you go.
Thanks.
She oversees TANF and food stamps, employment and training programs, the Community Services Block Grant, LIHEAP, SNAP, all aspects of SNAP, and as well as childcare. She recently began overseeing the call centers, which assist customers with various benefits. She also administers various tax credit programs that encourage the hiring of individuals with barriers to employment, and provided a credit for remodeling in low-income areas. So thank you to all of our panelists who have, as you can hear, all been very, very much engaged in WIO implementation. And I've sometimes commented that, particularly with respect to TANF, for a legislation that was not our own, we have certainly had a huge role, and it has certainly tasked us with a tremendous amount of work, effort, and hopefully creativity as we've tried to, realize the potential of the WIOA Act and the workforce system to really serve well our customers and connect them to employers. So it's largely going to be sort of a discussion back and forth, but we're going to start with a question, which is really what was your state's vision for implementing WIOA, but in particular with respect to our population that we're most concerned with today, the individuals receiving TANF and others with barriers to employment. And I'm thinking about it also from a human-centered design approach. What did you want it to look like on the ground when someone comes in the door of the One Stop or the AJC? And then, very briefly, how close have you come to that vision? So why don't we start with Maryland and move down the line?
Well, for being the only workforce representative here, for me, it was a conversation that I had with our labor exchange administrators, where we're often hung on the words that were the best kept secret. And I told them that, really, for me, that implicitly shows that we have failed in our mission. We need to we have all these great services that each and every one of you do. You go in, you do your work, you meet your customers on a day-to-day basis, you do the hard things. But are we relevant as a system? And WIOA really made us all partners in a overall system. And are we actually affecting the lives of our customers? In Maryland, we have this thing called the Benchmarks for Success. And, I got to say, Susan started it off by saying that you have the letter of the law, and then you have what makes sense for our customers. And for us in Maryland, we have established these benchmarks thanks to the great support of OFA in some of the work with ICF, and Joe Raymond has done a fantastic job with us in thinking of things and moving things forward. But for us, it was, you have these folks coming into your centers, And are you going to have that customer-centered design? Are you going to deal with that person holistically, or are you just going to get them a job, get them on the way, move them as a cog through the system? And Governor Hogan's vision was to really have our customers be in the center of what we do. And so I think those benchmarks and what we're setting forth in Maryland, I think that really focuses on that mission. Mm-hmm. Ann?
So I think to tag on to Brandon's comments, our hope, our goal is that a TANF customer or any other hard to serve customer will walk into an American Job Center and not be sort of shuffled to a TANF program, right, but be assessed and linked with all of the options and services that an American Job Center has at their disposal. Where are we in progress? And we can talk more about that.
Okay, we'll come back to where we are. Ann, do you want to go ahead and, Amy, sorry, and tell us a little bit about Massachusetts?
Sure, and Brandon, if it makes you feel better, my DOL, our labor colleagues brought me to their conference.
There you go.
I'm one of the only TANF people, and I made it out, so they were nice. So quick overview of Massachusetts, just for context. We are a state-administered state. We have about 30,000 TANF cases, about 57,000 clients. We do have regions and area offices. Our child care, child support are all separate from our TANF and SNAP program. Labor is also in a separate area. We have about 32 career centers across the state. So in 2014, when the WIOA decisions, it's not working? Okay. In 2014, when the WIOA decisions were being made, our governor, Charlie Baker, was fresh off of the campaign trail where he'd heard from employers across the state with our 3.3% unemployment rate, lucky us, that they were having a hard time filling their jobs, that they weren't finding potential employees with the skills that they needed. Soon after that, he appoints his Secretary of Health and Human Services, who comes and talks to him about the persistent unemployment for those who've been consistently left out of sort of the workforce system. Sorry, Brandon.
Yeah.
And
right.
Those are folks with disabilities, homeless, veterans, others with significant barriers, people on public benefits. And he said, WIOA is an opportunity. He gathered his leadership teams from housing and economic development, labor and workforce, health and human services, and education, and said, work together differently through WIOA to put these two problems together and to try and solve them in some new and different way. So we were told to do it. And that doesn't always mean you can still follow the letter of the law, even if the governor tells you to do it. But from the TANF perspective, our agency and our commissioner, Jeff McHugh, felt that we could continue with the sort of crumbs that we had for employment services for our clients. We are probably, I think, dead last in the amount of TANF grant funds that actually go to employment services. We have enough for 1 in every 3 of our work program required clients, which is not even those who could and should work if they wanted to, but aren't yet required to do that right now. So we saw it as an opportunity to have access to the kind of services and to the employers, because it's our career centers who are working with the local labor markets to understand where the demand is. So if we could figure out how to link in to the workforce system, we could open up a whole new level of resources for our clients. So we spent a couple months in sort of the vortex of state government resistance where, the career center said, we already serve your clients. And our folks said, they should be serving them. We shouldn't have to do anything different. They need to be serving them anyway. And we used to pull back the covers and just say, it's not happening, so let's just be honest about it, right? Some have gotten, some wander in and get services, but it's not meaningful and we don't really know what we're doing. And then at the local level, because there's requirements for the local partners to provide some level of funding, all the conversations at the local level were, how are you going to pay for your infrastructure or shared costs? So we hit the reset button and we decided to take a different kind of generative partnership approach. And we created a state-level interagency service agreement between us and our Department of Career Services. So we're providing this year $1 million, last year $500,000, because we said, yeah, you're serving our clients, but we actually want you to serve them in a very specific way. So we have an interagency service agreement. It specifies funding for each of the career centers and also the services that we expect. We have the local the local partners focusing just on the relationship building. We created a formal referral mechanism, a work program participant. We changed both of our IT systems, can you believe that? Wow. So that we can track participants enrolling, shared customers enrolling both sides. We have our staff co-located at the career centers, and the vision is really co-case management. So let the TANF agency do what it does best. Let us help stabilize families. Let us help make sure their childcare and transportation are in place so that they can access. And let the career centers do what they do best, which is help them provide job readiness skills. We can save money. We don't all need to be doing resume workshops.
Right.
So we are in process, and I can talk about the challenges later, but just since April, when we kind of got started on this new partnership and a new referral mechanism, we've made, just through the end of June, 451 referrals from our agencies to the Career Center, 67 have accessed WIOA training, and 31 have gotten jobs. So it's a start.
Yeah, great, wonderful, thank you.
I don't know if mine's working. I can hear it. So I'm also not going to let you feel lonely, Brandon. I was in workforce development for nearly 10 years, so that's very near and dear to my heart. I just kind of wanted to talk about what the locals had for their vision. I mean, we have our state vision, but we brought all of the local partners together in October of 2015 for a WIOA convening activity. And at that, they developed their vision statements. I'm not going to read off all their vision statements, but what was in nearly every single one was the following keywords: collaborate with partners, align resources, provide a skilled workforce, and support clients, which is pretty much what our state looks like too. So we didn't tell them what to say or how to say it, but they still almost all looked alike. As far as where we are, it depends on the region. I mean, we have some regions that were already having these partners to the table before anybody told them to. They were already very, very good at that. And we have other regions that weren't quite there yet. In my perfect world, I think that where it's working really well is where we have all of our partners at the table with the client and everybody raises their hand and says what they can do. That's where it works best. We are in the process of working on a true braiding team, so we're going to go across the state and get best practices and say, okay guys, this is what it really looks like. We've seen your state plans, we've read your state plans, they look awesome, but now let's put that in practice. We're not really shocked on the areas that it's working really well at and some of the areas that are having some bumps in the process. But that's kind of our next step, is getting back out there and really seeing what's going on and helping them through that process.
And I love that in Missouri, that you are thinking at the state level, what is your role in facilitating technical assistance or best practices? Because I think one of the things that I noticed over time, we were having these conversations at the federal level and we were communicating down to the state level, but it wasn't always clear when you started to talk with providers or whatever, that they weren't necessarily hearing everything. So I sort of heard two approaches, if I interpret this correctly. One where, because Massachusetts really wanted to assure that a certain level or standard of quality of service was provided, you all set an agreement at the state level. Missouri's sort of taken a bottom-up approach, and then we'll be working with the locals. So I'm curious how Massachusetts, because I know you all, Maryland, had quite a process, right? And so I think that'd be a good next, where you all are with that.
Yeah, we had a really good collaboration at the state level. Ann and I and our teams, we really did develop a great working relationship to not only in the WIOA implementation, but then focusing on other things that we can connect with. And for us, the next step was then, we hit the button in submission of the state plan, put it through the portal on or around April 1, and let our federal partners look at it and do what they were doing behind the scenes. But then that gave us a chance then to go to our local areas and say, this is the relationship that we've had at the state. Now let's talk about modeling that or having that in your local areas. you're absolutely right. Some local areas were not there, and still are having difficulty with that relationship. And just because you say as a state, we're going to do this, I mean, Maryland is one of 14, 15, depending on who you ask, states that had TANF into the state workforce plan. And so, you weren't going to just go, okay, just because the state did it, here you go, locals, because that's never going to happen, And so for us, we wanted to set local implementation teams. We had two convenings, one which we did on our own, the other we did with the help of OFA and the facilitation of Mathematica. We were able to really drill down with these local implementation teams of putting the innovation back in WIOA, because right now everybody was focused on, you had the state plan and then your local plans and then the regional plans and then infrastructure costs and all that and MOUs and everything within section 121 of WIOA that was, there's a lot of that compliance stuff and check the box, to the point where one of my local directors has now famously said it, because I've quoted him a number of times, of when can we stop all this compliance stuff and get to actually innovating? I mean, we're in that compliance syndrome of, okay, well, the state made us do this, or our federal partners made us do this, so now we have to jump through that hoop. Where do we get back to the customer center? Where do we get back to, my argument was you could be innovative in those compliance documents, in those where your local plan sets out the vision, and we reviewed those at the state level, all sitting in the room together, reviewing those together. So it wasn't just a Department of Labor thing. It wasn't just a TANF thing. So that whenever we provided feedback back to the local areas, it wasn't, this is what you have to do it. It was, look, we know you need to take a little more time and engage your partners. Then it turned over to the MOUs, and then it turned over to the resource sharing agreements, where we have the infrastructure costs, which is a dirty word, dirty two words, I guess. But really and so what we tried to do in Maryland was say, here's your local plan where you set the strategic vision. Here's the MOUs where you have operationalized that. And now that you've done those two things, let's talk about resource sharing where you can monetize the relationship you've established. And so in doing that, we've been able to, it wasn't easy, it was a ton of bumps and bruises along the way, but at the end of the day, they started realizing, hey, now we're a team, now we can innovate, now we can do some cool things together.
We had a big debate about whether we just, as a state TANF agency, just allocate the 1.5% and just keep it moving. But felt very strongly, as I know all of you know, the best innovation occurs at the local level. And if we didn't force that conversation to happen at the local level, we would have missed an opportunity to get some of the best ideas.
And so how many, the local implementation plans, was it by county or workforce?
We've got 12 workforce areas,
okay.
And 5 regions.
And 23
and
counties in a
23
city.
counties,
It all matches very well.
A partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I think, were you the one that said earlier that you all had actually changed your regions to align between TANF and WIOA, or was that not you all?
No, that was us.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. We had 19 regions, and we just did a new RFP, and we're getting ready to award contracts, but those contracts are not in 19 regions anymore. They're in 10 of the WIOA regions plus 1, St. Louis City, because they're larger. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit then about partnerships. And we've heard some. Let's talk a little bit more. I think, which ones have been key, and what was key to success, and what were some of the things you had to sort of get beyond or above or around, I don't know, to make those partnerships successful? And to what extent I guess, were you building on relationships that existed, or were you sort of going from scratch? And I don't know if anyone wants to. What?
I mean, we weren't going from scratch entirely. I think similar to the Missouri experience, some jurisdictions, there was a very natural partnership. In some jurisdictions, the American Job Center was already a TANF provider, or TANF workforce provider. What has been interesting is to find out that even in places where we assumed a good relationship, it's maybe not as good as we had thought. So in one jurisdiction, for example, the American Job Center was the TANF provider, and what we've come to find out is there's a specific TANF office, and the TANF customers don't access the rest of the services from the American Job Center, only those that are contracted for, under the TANF contract. So that's a relationship that we assumed was really good. And turned out maybe we have a little room for improvement. So that's been a little surprising. I think some of our assumptions were really, really challenged through this process. And in fact, areas where we had sort of conflict and complicated personalities that didn't necessarily gel very well together turned out to produce the best coordinated implementation plan. I mean, it was a big surprise.
True. Now, Jim Ripkowski, our assistant secretary for the division, likes to tell a story that whenever it came time for determining combined plan and then combined plan partners, that he had one of our partners, that shall remain nameless, actually look across the table from him and say, "It will be a cold day in hell before we work together." And so he opened one of our WIOA convenings as, "Welcome to a cold day in hell." I think that, but for us, I think that is the key, is that, this has been a stretching experience. And it means sometimes that you're not going to get what you think is your way, but you can either swallow your bureaucratic pride and do what's right for your combined customers, or you can go about and do the same thing like you have been under WIOA and JTPA before that and all the other things. So here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity to hit the reset button. We had a great partner in our regional office for DOL. They literally said, if it's not in the, we were waiting for the regs, and that was that limbo period of time. We could wait for the regs and then let our federal partners, kind of explain it to us of what their vision is, or we could go out on our own and do what's right for Maryland. And so we have a part of our state plan is what we call an alignment group, where we bring in both state and local leaders together, sitting down once a month to talk about the important issues, to talk about data sharing and all of the obstacles that are around that, to talk about things like new innovations. We are big in apprenticeship in Maryland. We're big in we're working on things like finding ways for skilled immigrants to access services in Maryland. We're trying to find all of these. We're looking and working together. I sat in on a panel about child support. We're trying to make that connection. A light bulb moment for me was 70% of the child support or non-custodial parents. I just got this one, so bear with me. 70% of the non-custodial parents also were justice involved. So we have these things of reentry programs, and where these are customers that are coming back into society, that if we're not plugging them into employment, if we're not plugging them into education, then we're going to have a problem of them coming back into the justice system. And so is there a way to build the relationship or work off the relationship and move forward? I think there is, and I just got it to do, so thank you guys.
So you all are continuing to build new relationships and new partnerships.
Yeah.
What about you all?
I mean, I think that the relationship at the state level between the partners has been really key to just sorting out what do we want to leave at what level. So our strategy is sort of working out at the state level the cold day in hell, which we had too, for sure, meant that the local levels could focus on the relationship. So if we took off their shoulders local infrastructure costs and those kind of decision makings, and we said, just focus on your relationship. Spend time in each other's offices, understand about each other's processes. We just did a cross-training for all of our Career Center staff with our TANF case managers so that they understood kind of each other's systems and so I think what we were able to do at the state level was try and say, what do we have to work out to enable the local partnerships to flourish in a way that was really meaningful and that had them having sort of the right level of discussion. At the state level, we have a lot of variation in the areas too. So we have ones who had existing relationships and ones who didn't have existing relationships. And, for me to talk to the career centers and be like, you need to serve our TANF clients better, la, 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 and everything. So we really had to have a joint strategy. So one of our career centers who was, why would we serve TANF clients? We had like a joint SWAT team that went down to help them figure out what the best way to work together. And that's been a really effective strategy too, obviously strength-based. I think an interesting thing between the culture of the two systems too is, we as a TANF agency are pretty compliance driven. So I would tell our staff, here's what we're going to do. We'll be there at 10:30 on Wednesdays, and they would do it. And the workforce system is more, they report to a board, they're more used to sort of local leadership and decision making, and that's been kind of an interesting culture to, among other things, to kind of overcome.
In Missouri, it's been an interesting road. Once upon a time, many moons ago, the Division of Workforce Development actually ran the employment and training part of TANF. That was pulled back from them, came back to FSD, contracted it out, and who is contracting it out again. And then this whole WIOA thing came along, and we're like, FSD's like, the director of Workforce Development actually came over to FSD also. So she said, we're going to go ahead and do that TANF combined plan thing. I was like, well, whatever you want to do is what we're going to do. And I had no idea what that meant. But we're doing it, and we're moving along. And I will tell you, though, it is really nice knowing all of the 14 Workforce Development Board directors, because as soon as something comes up, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's just how they are. I know who they are, and I know what their quirks are. That's really nice to know. But we would not have been at the table with vocational rehabilitation, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, unemployment compensation. We would not have been at the table with all of those agencies had we not taken the leap to put TANF in the middle of it. And we have developed some really good things, and we're kind of in a place of, but what can we do now? We're always thinking a common assessment, a common intake, a common this, that's all great, but what can we do now? Like, what can we get done? And so we're taking chunks at a time in some of these teams that we're in and trying to sort it out that way. But our teams are very close, and after spending, weeks in a room going over state plans, you learn to like each other if you don't. So we like each other.
Not love yet?
No.
I'll say this. Vocational rehabilitation has snacks. So that may be love. It may be love. I'm not sure yet.
Key to partnerships. I think that's right.
Snacks help.
Chocolate especially. So one of the things a focus of WIOA is career ladders, career pathways, sector-based strategies. And it's really an area where I think from the TANF perspective, we're like, wow, this is going to be really great because, TANF is not, we're not as comfortable with LMI data. We don't have as strong connections with employers. But we also know a lot of times our folks aren't ready for that first rung of the ladder. So I'm sort of curious as to how you're seeing whether there has been more access and opportunities for TANF participants to participate in those sorts of opportunities through WIOA in your state.
So I think one of the important things we've learned through it is that the career centers aren't meant for all of the TANF clients, right? So I think that's like a starting point first and foremost, which we have. Susan Dreyfus talked about 5 groups. I'd love to know what those are. We have at least 4 distinct ones that we're thinking of. And I think the folks who are like most job ready, have some history, at least a high school degree, probably some level of English, are the ones right now that we feel most comfortable sending over to the career centers. And we have a group of those. And great, we can save our funding for the folks in the other categories and feel confident that those folks are going to get the right level of services. But the other vision we sort of have for that group is that as our TANF program is seen as a ramp into some level of pathway to self-sufficiency, that the access to the Career Center is a starting point for that should then be the fallback for our clients, not us. So our hope is that they build a relationship with the Career Center, they get on that ladder. Likely, they're going to have to take a job in order to be able to make some level of ends meet. And when they're ready to continue their advancement and move through economic ladders, it's the Career Center they go back to for continued support and employment. We want to be there if they need us, but we hope what will happen is that they'll continue to be able to build their career path through the local relationships that are being built. Community colleges are at the table, as you said, the other state agencies as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And another important partner in this, in WIOA, is Title II, is adult education. Adult education was co-located in our offices, was moved over back, I believe, 2010 or so. We're one of a handful of states that has both workforce and adult education together. And really, that is a relationship, I think, in WIOA that a lot of folks overlook. Adult education has a very important part in WIOA success for nothing more than one of the largest barriers to employment that any individual has is lack of a high school diploma. In Maryland right now, there's 500,000 folks that currently do not have a high school diploma. And this is a partnership that I think a lot of states really need to meaningfully look at. And one that we have been really big in connecting. I would say, too, that WIOA talks about that employer-driven model. The employer needs to be not only at the table, but the employer you need to hear the needs of the employer. And sometimes we as state agencies, we as these entities doing workforce development, we like to create the program and then go to the employer afterwards and go, hey, I got something for you. And really, that's not right. And it does a disservice to our customers. Because if we put them in this fancy little program and we have the marketing and the branding and here flashing and here's the title and yay, and then there's no job at the end of it, then we've really missed the boat. So one of the things and that's why we've been so heavily invested with apprenticeship. And one of the things that we've been working with, even trying with some of our apprenticeship sponsors, is pulling in some TANF participants into apprenticeship. That's not been, we haven't completely figured that one out. I mean, we've tried some cohorts, but then we sat back at the table and went, okay, what went wrong, what went well? But I think that is something in this employer-driven environment that WIOA requires us to be. Then by all means, we need to have the employer not just as the afterthought, but needs to be at the beginning of the focus and work with us as the partner. That's one of the things that we do with the Maryland Earn program. Another program that we're sector-based, all that stuff, that has cohorts of 5 or more businesses around a workforce need, and then we fund it so that there's programs, or so that the program that comes out after 12 to 14 weeks, there's a job at the end of it for these. And so we're getting 85, 90% employment rates because the employer is driven throughout. And so I think that's the one thing that the workforce development system can do and should do for TANF customers, is that there is a way to self-sufficiency. Let us help you.
And are you seeing then that TANF participants are moving into those opportunities? In some places.
In some places.
It all
And,
depends.
you know, I mean, so much of it's regional. So we know, for example, in Baltimore City, right now is one of the largest infrastructure projects going on with the Under Armour development. So we've been proactive, and as the TANF agency and the SNAP agency too, we've been investing right now in training programs for that customer base that we know there are going to be jobs in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. So in a place like that, we have a ton of providers that are strong, strong both from a programmatic perspective, but also from sort of an organizational health. We don't necessarily have that opportunity and those partners in every part of the state. So some places that is occurring more naturally and more rapidly. I think other places we're going to need to do some more nurturing to get those connections of public assistance customers with the types of programs that are going to result in apprenticeship and career pathways and the like.
Well, even that, the FSET, you all have been using FSET funds. And part of those funds are also are really funding programs that we have through the EARN program. So we have state funds going through to EARN. Now we have these FSET funds, and so we've been able to really watch some great partnerships grow because of that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So what about challenges as you look forward? I really sort of. What are some of the challenges remaining? Where do you all want to head as you sort of look in the next year? What are you trying to accomplish or do differently or grow?
The fact that you have 2 new data systems. What?
No,
Yeah.
Or one data system for
existing bad legacy systems with some updates.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's an area that we are looking at very closely, if not in the next, not the next 12 months, because it is
It'll take a while.
state government after all. But within the next couple of years, getting a shared data system that makes much more reasonable and feasible the idea of doing things like common intake and sort of a comprehensive case management approach. And so I think for us, that's going to be an enormous focus in the next year or so. Yeah,
I mean, one of my favorite stories to tell is that I had probably the most maddening experience in state government I decided I was going to take on data sharing. And not only was I going to take on data sharing, I was going to get a bunch of assistant attorneys general in a room and talk about data sharing. And then it goes...
And then it died.
You are absolutely right.
Don't bring in the legal people.
I have
right
told,
away.
well,
He's
as
an
an
attorney
attorney myself, so I am going to get beat up in the parking lot. But for me, I said I likened the experience to knowing what the rat in the maze is, because I ran. Hey guys, this is a great idea. Smack. ran. I knew there was cheese somewhere, but I wasn't getting there. So, I mean, whenever you talk about things like FERPA and HIPAA and the UI confidentiality, because everybody wants UI data, but our federal regulations don't really make that easy. So what are we going to do as a state whenever WIOA says you need to share data, you need common customer, all of this great, wonderful stuff, but we have a lot of other federal requirements that don't make it easy. And so I think that is a huge lift that I think everybody has to figure out, work together on figuring that out.
Good. And Jeriane, what about where are you all heading?
Well, I mean, we have some very clear things we are going to get done. We are going to get them done.
We will.
Very soon. Yeah, part of them. They don't like when I go to these things anyways, because then we have a lot more work to do because of all my ideas. So anyways, back to the question. So we will get the electronic resource directory done. It will be done. We will have a very, very high level, where do you need to go if you answer some of these questions. It's very high level, like do you need help with food assistance? For the areas that don't have everybody sitting at the table, because we know they don't all have everybody sitting at the table. Since we released our RFP for our employment training program for TANF, we have a lot of work to do on that side, and I know that that's not completely WIOA, but it is because we've changed everything to look like WIOA. So we're going to look at employment outcomes and all sorts of things like that. Which means we got a lot of work to do. I've got to re-educate the contractors, and I know the work participation rate's the most favorite thing to talk about, but I'm not even going to let them see it anymore, so that they can't worry about it anymore for a little while. But we have to re-educate the contractors. I want to rebrand our program. Right now it says you have to or else, and I wanted to say, well, if you get this, then you get childcare, then you get access to the Career Center, you get access to all of these sorts of things. So I feel like kind of it's WIOA and kind of it's just starting over. I've been waiting for 10 years to do this the way I want it to do it, which is let's focus on where we want to get and not where we are with that person. And then, of course, the performance system. I want us to be in the same system as DWD is on performance and have our own programs listed in there so we can see the outcomes of our programs. And we would already be there, except for they're also going out to bid for whatever system it's going to be. But we've had those discussions, and we will get in their RFP to get us added to their system.
Great. I would say we're focused on 3 areas. One is sort of the continuing the culture joining of the two. So the first time I was in a meeting and one of our workforce colleagues referred to young children as a barrier to employment, and I almost fell off my chair. I was like, I don't think that's the right way to think about children. So I think we have some work. That was not a 2-gen approach, I didn't think. Right?
That's a 2-gen.
So I think I think that's something we can bring to the workforce, right? So we can help, I've been to 10 career centers, and there's no children under 12.
Yeah.
But we can't give childcare until 2 weeks, until they're enrolled and they've selected a program. So we have work to do between these 2 systems to make sure that you're not just talking about individuals, or workforce is not, and we're not putting barriers in the way to actually be able to access those. So I think there's a culture between family employment and the job seeker kind of part of the world. The second is just internally, if we really want to be letting people access workforce, we have to kind of clear the path of all the low expectations and disincentives to work that our policies create. And whether that's grant structures or income disregards or asset tests or, how we as a system really have to inventory our own policies around how we treat work, so that if they get a job, they can actually keep and retain that job and keep moving through. And that's something I think we all have to examine in our own worlds. And it sounds like we're going to get some help from our federal partners, so that's great. And then the third area, back to sort of that group the governor brought together and banged our heads together and said work together differently, because we also know that all of our clients across our public benefit programs sort of experience this terrible cliff effect, or where they might get employed and then the increase in hours, or they decline a raise, or they decline because the commensurate increase in income doesn't match what they lose in public benefits. And somehow we have to figure out how to get the systems working together and move our systems and policies so that work pays for the folks who are doing the right thing and on this path. So those are kind of the 3 areas I think we'll be working on over the next year.
I think that's a great point about family. I mean, my wife, who actually we're celebrating our 2nd barrier, I guess. We just had a
I was just thinking the same thing. I was like, gosh, I'm glad I already have a job.
There you go. Yeah.
I would be in trouble.
Yeah. So my little Scarlett was born 3 weeks ago, and so before that, before she became our little barrier, she was unemployed. no
His
fault of
wife,
her-
not the baby.
Not her, yeah. We have strict, we have guidelines here at the Butler. High standards. So my wife was unemployed and got the lovely notice from unemployment insurance that you have to, come to the center for the workshop. She became my secret shopper, and so in bold letters there was the phrase, "No child care will be provided." So we just submitted a wonderful little plan to our federal partners that said that we're bringing in our partners, the TANF agencies. We're doing all of this great stuff, and then we're going to send out a notice that says, "Come to our workshop. No child care will be provided." That's silly, and so. Whenever we're focused on, if we're going to focus on the family, if we're going to truly focus on barriers to employment, childcare is transportation, childcare. We all know them, and so if we're going to focus on providing those wraparound services, what does a family-friendly center look like? I think it's a great concept, and it's a great way to bring in our partners. Because, wouldn't it be great if there'd be child care provided in those centers while the parent is looking for a job? Wouldn't that be, we have one center that currently is doing that. But here's a great working relationship that nobody's worked on yet. And whenever I got the bold face, I decided to take a little trip to our partners in unemployment insurance and said, "Hey, let's figure this out."
That's great. Well, we're almost to the end of our time, but a couple of things have struck me. One is this notion, Amy, that you had talked about, that if someone, comes in on TANF, they get a job, and that they will know they can come back to the workforce, the WIOA system, the one-stop to continue to get training to advance their career. And I really think that gets to the notion that we really truly have a shared customer. We are with them. Different programs may be with them at different sort of junctures or in their career pathway. But I think if we can continue to communicate, we are serving the same customer, but with the added understanding, which I think is what TANF brings, that most people coming in the door have some sort of family responsibility, whether it's an older parent, children, spouse, whatever, that they don't typically come fully unattached, and that there are these perspectives. So I guess, and I think that's what TANF can help bring to the conversation and to the array of services that TANF can help provide or link to. But I guess sort of to close out, if you were trying to pitch to the workforce system, what does TANF bring? Why is it worth having TANF as a partner? What would you say? So, Anne, you want to begin?
Well, I've said it all before. He doesn't want to have to hear it again. No, one of the first things that we experienced was a perception on the part of our workforce partners as to sort of who a TANF customer was. And, basically they were perceived as a barely employable drag on performance. And so, we've been able to sort of, I think we're making progress anyway, in reframing our customers as, really eligible job seekers. And so one of the very small things we did, and it was a really brilliant step, was doing sort of profiles on who our customers are. And across the state, 60% of our customers have high school diplomas. And some percent, 60-some% are on benefits for fewer than 2 years on average. And so, we do bring an awesome workforce. It just is requiring a little bit of reframing. And I think we're starting to shift the mindset a little bit of who our customers are and what they can bring. And if we can bring them with some additional training and supports, then all the better. They're no longer a drag on performance. They're in fact an improvement in your performance. So we're going to keep that culture change. I mean, I think that's the bottom line is rethinking who our customers are.
Great. Either of you?
I mean, I think from our perspective, I mean, just the fact that we're going to be a good partner. You know, that is, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm going to. That's something that the agency that I work for now has not always been. They have not always been at the table. But the fact that we will be at your meetings, we will see what resources we can find, and we have found resources to assist with resource directories. We have people sitting on the boards. I mean, the fact that we show up is at least a very, very good start. I think the other side of it is that we don't only have TANF clients, we also have food stamp clients. And those are the clients, all of them, are not all of them, but a big part of them that need to fill those jobs. So we need each other.
Yeah.
I mean, in Missouri, there's 800,000-ish people on food stamps, 30,000-ish on TANF, but you need all of these individuals, and we need to work together because you need us as much as we need you, sort of thing.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, not to repeat, but I would say both things for us too, which is we've tried to be good partners, and we've tried to, you know, we showed up at their, you know, Department of Labor audit and cheerleaded for them, and we expect them to kind of return. I mean, they're under an obligation to engage TANF and SNAP, and we'll be a good partner in that, and we'll expect them to return that, you know, and I think on the same hands, we also oversee our SNAP program. We have about 750,000. A lot of those are working poor folks who could be on the pathway and filling some of those sector jobs that are in high demand. So I think we have the people, and we also have, you know, have their back to some, as long as they have ours.
That's great.
And the kids.
Well, you know, I think this has been a great conversation, and I also feel like we're ending sort of in a very positive and hopeful way as we look toward the future. And I want to thank all of our panelists today for this great conversation. Thank you all. I guess so. Lisa, I guess we march off, and okay.
All right.
Others come on.
Thank you, everyone. That was so inspirational, and it was great for you to share the true stories, not just the pretty, but where we can go from here, what you can do with your challenges. We'll be beginning our closing. Clarence will be giving his closing remarks very shortly, but I just want to thank some people who have helped me. I want to thank my team. If you could stand up, Carol Mizoguchi, James Butler, and unfortunately, Damon Warder stepped out of the room. Damon asked, could he lead this effort? He wanted this, and he really was the champion for the summit. So just everybody tell Damon I said he did a great job. I want to thank our regional colleagues, because we couldn't do this. They were our eyes and ears. They reached out to you. So could all the regional staff please stand? Our RPMs, our program specialists. Thank you so much for all of your help and your support. And the immediate office of the director, I think I made them get as many gray hairs as I did in reviewing. So Lauren, Deborah, I can't see you. Would you please stand if you're there? And definitely our deputy director, Susan, she had to run away from me. Thank you. And our BLH staff, Steve, Pat, and Casey, they really worked hard to make sure everything was taken care of. Thank you. Our ICF staff, Katerina and Jill in the back, and your colleagues, please, thank you so much for all your help. And the AV team, thank you. It was so helpful to know that when something happened, we just had to run out and get you as opposed to try to figure it out ourselves, so thank you. And as Clarence, we can give Clarence a hand as he walks forward. So thank you, Clarence, for this opportunity.
Lisa, thanks so much. And I want to say thanks to each and every one of you. for being a part of this, and I hope that we accomplished our objective of providing a compelling and stimulating conference where you were able to convene with folks that are doing the same work that you're doing, that we created a learning environment and shared a vision for where we are trying to take not only the TANF program, but the broader American safety net. So I want to thank you for your participation in this, and I have to share something with you. Remember the presentation that we had yesterday of the initiatives that serve the hardest to serve and the videos that you have been strategically placed around. We had a discussion with the regional manager of this hotel and Marriott properties in the area. And he said he was very moved by what they saw and said that, we have a labor challenge in our system. There's less than 4% unemployment in the region, and we cannot keep our kitchen, our maintenance, and our engineering staff jobs filled. We used to have a connection with a customer base to do that, but we do not anymore. And it appears that you do. And so we would like to enter into agreement in this region where there are 125 properties. We'd like to enter into agreement for your agencies to come together to help us identify and build the capacity of our labor force in our critical need areas. And so, folks, just by us showing up, we have added value to our customer base. As I said throughout, this is an amazing moment and opportunity, and we have to seize it. The customers that we serve desperately need us to innovate, to collaborate, to cooperate, and to be fearless, to break down barriers, to be able to help them create their own version of the American dream. Folks, this is our time, and we are going to take every advantage of this moment. On behalf of the hundreds of thousands of people that you serve, and many who will never know your name, I want to say thank you for them and wish you safe travels back home. And I would ask you that even though you're going to be weary when you get back home, please recharge and reignite the spirit of this week in your jurisdiction to help us reimagine the American safety net. Thank you so much for your participation here. Everybody get home safe.